A video very much captures what you hear a lot of the times in Europe, particularly in the UK, and it's kind of interesting that what it shows is that the imperial powers are themselves recolonized by nations they colonized. And is that what the particular concern is there a concern that the moral price of colonial exploitation is ultimately going to undermine these countries? Why is there this concern? You see it in every country that had an empire about the presence in their society of people. Most of the people were brought there. The reason there are so many South Asians in England is because England ruled South Asia, and these people predominantly were brought here to work. The reason there's so many Algerians in France is France ruled Algeria. It's the imperial power of Europe that sucked people in. I mean, you go to North Korea, you're not going to see any borders, you know. It's that simple. So, I mean, you go to Mexico and you don't see a lot of people are immigrating. I mean, weak, destitute, run-down countries are just full of, if you want to have pure ethnic society. I mean, one is have no influence globally, and two, be destitute and absolutely poor. But why is it that people want to imagine this? Why do they want to imagine in a few years the empires are going to come back? And I mean, clearly, there's an element there. They just don't want non-whites in Europe. It's that simple. This probably about half the white people in Western Europe believe that they just want to turn Western Europe into a racial preserve. But here's the simple fact. White Western Europeans are not breeding at a fast enough rate to replicate themselves. A Europe that doesn't allow immigrants in would slowly within the next 100 or 200 years become extinct, would economically become insignificant, and it would simply be the status of, say, of Britain in a world, in 100 years if it didn't have immigration. At the present rate of reproductive rate would be economically like a Belgium, and the Belgium would go down the state of potentially these countries could be surpassed by Pakistan, not just Pakistan and Indonesia, but potentially bigger countries in South Africa, Brazil. They would have far more economic influence. So we have these Western Europeans who won't have enough kids and yet become obsessed about foreigners. I mean, and it kind of shows a patheticness of the conservative ideology. We don't want these goddamn foreigners, but, don't bother ask us to reproduce our society at enough state. And this is kind of the tragedy of the West. It can't produce or reproduce. All it can do is consume. There's three elements that societies need to do to survive. They need to produce, they need to reproduce, and they need to accumulate. Okay? The West can accumulate, but it can't produce. It has to buy almost everything from the other side, and it can't reproduce anymore. It has to bring people in. And this impotency, this patheticness, this inability, the fact that people have one kid maybe, and there's another kid is played out in a kind of hatred against those people who have to come in to have families. I mean, anyone I've been to Turkish ethnic weddings. If you go to a Turkish or an African wedding in London, you'll see hundreds of people. The whole community is there. The woman, she's going to be pregnant in a year or two. People have children all over the place. They're sustaining the future. You know what? And if English families, they get married, there's a handful of people, and there's no kid for 10 years. If English people, if French people, if Spanish people don't have any kids, what do they want to be depopulated? You want a society in Britain where there's three retired old people who senile can't work for every one person who works. But God, the young people in England can barely stay sober. I can't imagine. You got to bring foreigners in to support them. What else are you going to do?